Hello, welcome to Trump Watch, our special broadcast. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The countdown to April 2nd has begun and large economies are keeping a close watch. US President Donald Trump will unveil reciprocal tariffs in less than 48 hours. Speaking at the Oval Office, President Trump said that he has settled on country-based reciprocal tariffs. However, he stopped short of revealing the details. The US President was touting a flat 20% tariff on all imports into the US. But in the last few days, US trade officials have been signaling a tailored approach with different tariffs on different countries. The Trump administration has also released a list of foreign countries' regulations that it regards as trade barriers. The US Trade Representative's report continues to place India on a priority watch list, citing intellectual property concerns. It has also flagged concerns over India's internet shutdowns, data localization rules, among others. Sources tell CNBC-TV18 that the United States government is considering to give India a temporary reprieve from the proposed reciprocal tariffs. However, this is contingent on approval from President Trump. The US leader has claimed that India will be dropping its tariffs substantially.
If you look at the European Union on cars, the European Union already dropped their tariff down to 2.5%. It was announced a couple of days ago, which is what which is a very small tariff. The United States charged very little. And I think I heard that India just a little while ago is going to be dropping its tariffs very substantially.
All right, Trump there saying at the White House that India will be dropping tariffs substantially. We're now joined by Former Commerce Secretary Rajeev Kher. Mr. Kher, thank you very much for joining us. You've been a close observer of India-US trade negotiations over the years, and you may also be familiar with Brendan Lynch, who is a career diplomat, and he has been a trade negotiator for many years in the Obama administration, the Biden administration, and the Trump administrations as well. Do you get a sense that the negotiations last week have been positive, and even though the reciprocal tariffs will come into effect, India will get a reprieve?
Well, thank you, Parikshit, for having me over this program. Well, first of all, as far as the negotiations and the character and nature of those negotiations in the last 4 days, I think everything has been under a cloud. One doesn't really know what exactly has happened. But I can imagine that these negotiations have gone in the positive direction, because the statements that have come out clearly show that both countries are willing to enter into some sort of a understanding, and negotiations will be pursued in that direction. Now, as far as the whole issue of reciprocal tariff is concerned, I think there is a lot of haze around it. And as you said, very little has come to be known as to what exactly President Trump means by reciprocal tariff. It can mean many things to the audience. It could be purely a manner in which, a manner of speaking as to if you impose tariff on me, I'll impose tariff on you. And then it can increase in complexity from country to country, average tariffs being equaled. It could be product-based tariff being equaled. It could be tariff line-based tariff being equaled. So at the moment, it's very difficult to really say as to what exactly is meant by the reciprocal tariff, the phrase used very often.
Right. We'd also like to ask you, because earlier today there was a USTR trade estimate report which focused on the non-tariff barriers in India, from internet shutdowns. It spoke about regulations in the dairy sector which prohibit entry of foreign players. It spoke about data localization laws, India's digital commerce regulations as well. So, considering all of that, do you think US is putting a lot of pressure on India to reduce non-tariff barriers as part of the larger bilateral trade agreement as well?
As a matter of fact, Parikshit, the national trade estimates is a process which US comes out every year. And this essentially lists out the non-tariff barriers which different countries use against, in American perception, use against the American products. And it is for the first time that it is not as if these issues are not pursued by the successive US governments, but it is for the first time when these national trade estimates are being taken as a counterpoint for negotiations. And what one fears is that they can be tariffized. And therefore, when we interpret tariff, we can actually be talking about plain, simple tariffs, or we could even be talking about tariffs plus tariffized non-tariff barriers. So as I said earlier, we really don't know what exactly reciprocal tariff would include, whether they would be simple tariffs, import duties, or they would have many other manifestations of taxes and incentives and subsidies and non-tariff barriers and so on and so forth. So it's a very wide sort of a thing, but national trade estimates have been used by successive US governments to put pressure on us.
Okay. Sir, I'd also like to ask you whether US and this current administration under Donald Trump can be taken at face value. Now, they're a government which has decided to stop funding and financing of the WTO. They have pulled out of the Paris Agreement once again. They are going back on several international obligations wherever they feel it is in America's interest to do so. So do you feel that US has a larger game over here? It's not just about a bilateral trade deal or about India lowering tariffs. They want to become the largest energy supplier of India. Do you think there is a larger game to it and India should be measured with the kind of incentives it gives the US government?
Absolutely. See, we cannot, tariff is simply a weapon. Trade has been used very often by different governments in different countries as a weapon. But here now we see a very concerted, very well planned, very well thought out process in which trade is being used and tariff particularly is being used as a weapon. And if you look at the history of the last 4 or 5 months, since President Trump began his campaign till yesterday, every point tariff has been used for settling all scores in 2 ways. One is use tariff as a tactic to bring the opponent to the negotiating table. And as we have seen, many opponents or many trade partners have, even without asking, have succumbed for very, very many reasons, and we can discuss that. The other is that you have open trade negotiations by challenging imposition of tariffs by President Trump, and that has brought the trade partner to the negotiating table. So tariffs are being used both as a weapon to get the partner come to the negotiating table, and they're also being used. There is a clear understanding that if required, tariffs will be imposed. The consequences of that imposition is something which has still not been explained. There are, of course, reports from economists of both sides where it has been differently interpreted as to tariffs will cause American economy to go into a negative spiral, inflation, and so on and so forth. And there are another set of economists who advise President Trump who have been saying that it will not be so. So you are right, there is a game plan, whether it's energy or whether it's any other product area where they are pursuing market access.
Right. Do you also feel, sir, that when it comes to these tariff negotiations, will these reciprocal tariffs, and no matter what the quantity may be or the percentage may be, will it really hurt Indian companies in the long run? Because, you know, as many global investors say, US has always gained from globalization, and now the US is looking strongly inwards. So even if those reciprocal tariffs are going to be on India, will India be very badly off in the next 8 months to 12 months or 2 years?
Well, Parikshit, 2 things. First of all, you know, this is part of a much larger game that US is playing. And tariffs is being used from the perspective that President Trump has been voicing, that it is being used to bring back manufacturing into the US, to reduce trade deficit, and so on. And so therefore, expecting that all of this would happen in a very short duration is absolutely unlikely, and it can be explained at length. I think from an Indian perspective, tariffs certainly in some product areas will cause a discomfort to India. If you take a short-term view, for example, automobiles, the other day automobiles were imposed 25% tariffs. Now, Indian exposure of automobiles export to US is very limited, and therefore, in the short run, it may not cause. But if India has ambitions of exporting automobiles to the US, then clearly over the long run, it will impact. So it all depends on what products. For example, look at the frozen shrimp. Now, if there is, for example, today India's largest export is frozen shrimp in the agriculture sector. Now, if there is an imposition of tariff, today it goes into the US at zero duty or between 0 to 5%. Now, if there is an imposition of tariff on shrimp, then clearly it will impact. And therefore, the industry will suffer because US is a large destination for India shrimp. So it depends. It will vary from product to product.
Right. My final question, sir, if very briefly, if you can explain to us that when it comes to the agriculture and dairy sector, in trade negotiations, these have been the red lines, especially when it comes to wheat, maize and dairy. Now, these trade negotiations are being watched by UK and EU also to see the kind of concessions are given. Will India be able to give up those red lines, allow access to US in areas such as agriculture and dairy products, or do you think that India will not cross that line and those sensitivities?
See, first of all, if you go by the rules of the game as they are contained in GATT, then there cannot be a specific tariff reduction for A country or B country alone. It will have to be an MFN process unless there is a free trade agreement which is negotiated. And as far as I understand, what is being talked about is a sectoral, multi-sectoral, bilateral trade agreement and not a free trade agreement. So obviously, the benefits which are given here would pass on to the other trade partners as well, unless it's a free trade agreement with the US. Now, so far as India's agricultural tariffs is concerned and the products of American interest are concerned, I think we need to take into account 2 points. One, there is a complementarity between the two sides in many product areas. For example, the US interest in almonds, in walnuts, in apples, in whiskies is something where where India should have no opposition in a very significant manner. There are product areas where the US has interest and where India may have sensitivities, for example, wheat or dairy. Now, if you look at the Indian tariffs, I think they are on the higher side. In some product areas, they are significantly high. And I think there is a good case for India to review that, irrespective of the fact whether it's the US alone or it's EU. We need to look at tariffs from a very domestic perspective also, because we need to reform our agriculture sector. We need to make it more productive. And therefore, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to review our tariffs. Nobody is making a case that there should be a significant drop, or there should be drop at one go, or that there are no intermediate ways of doing so. For example, there are quotas which can be provided. But there is a case for us to look at these tariffs in a little more serious and a rigorous manner, and not just to rub them aside by saying that they are sensitive areas, sensitive products, and therefore we should not be dealing with them.
That's a very important point, sir. It's time to review the tariffs on agriculture and dairy. We cannot keep them aside as sensitive areas. It's time to review them properly all across the board. Thank you once again for being with us here on CNBC-TV18. We're now joined by Anurag Sehgal, Managing Director of Pricewaterhouse & Company, and Himanshu Tiwari, Partner, Trade and Customs at KPMG. Anurag, let me begin by asking you, Pricewaterhouse has done an assessment of reciprocal tariffs on India and the rest of the world. How do you think, and which according to you are the key sectors which will immediately be impacted by whatever tariff is announced by the US government come 12:30 a.m. India time on the 3rd of April?
So thanks for inviting me here. So yes, we have done a detailed assessment. The assessment is largely on the impact on businesses and what businesses should do. Now, having said that, as far as sectors are concerned, largely all the sectors wherein India has considerable presence in the US market will get impacted. The reason is simple because as of now, though we don't know what will be the shape of the reciprocal tariffs, but what we hear are that the reciprocal tariffs could be product specific or could be country specific, and there could be many many different permutations and combinations between this. But even if they are country specific, India's average import tariff is considerably higher as compared to that imposed by US, whether you see in trade weighted average terms also. But if they are commodity specific, then commodity to commodity, India's tariffs are considerably higher as compared to the US. So, irrespective of them, while the impact may vary in the percentage terms, but all the products, say for example, smartphones. Now, India has become a hub of smartphone exports since past few years with the success of PLI scheme and all. But if on smartphones, India's import duty is 15%. If these smartphones are exported by India under the reciprocal tariff measures to US, they may also attract 15% tariff. So they may also get affected. As of now, the smartphone exports from India attract 0% tariff into US. So these may get affected. Similar impact may happen on textile and apparel sector, similar impact on pharma sector, similar impact on auto components. In fact, on auto components, a separate tariff measure has already been announced by the US. So these all sectors may get impacted. Necessarily, whether the impact in the long term is beneficial to Indian exporters or detrimental will have to be seen, because in many cases, what we have examined in our report, the impact on a pure cost arbitrage basis, as far as tariff is concerned, may also be beneficial to Indian exporters if compared with other competitive partner countries, which may be attracting higher tariffs.
All right. Let me also go across to Mr. Himanshu Tiwari. Himanshu, as far as KPMG is concerned, have you done any assessment on what extent can India reduce tariffs, the average tariff rate? So what the US is right now talking about is that India's tariff rate all across the board is as high as 17%. US is around 2.5%. When it comes to non-agricultural goods, it's almost 13%. You need to bring it down somewhere close to the United States. What can India do in terms of bringing average tariffs down comfortably to somewhere bring it in line with where the US is?
Thanks, Parikshit, for having me here. I guess India is following a two-layered approach. One is a unilateral part of the tariff reduction that we see very clearly that Feb 1st, when the Union Finance Minister announced the budget, during the budget time, the duty rates on 1600 cc and above automotive, which effectively is the area where Harley Davidson supplies motorcycles in India, the duty rates have been reduced substantially. Also, we have seen that the duty rates on whiskeys have been reduced, originating in United States. So there's a unilateral action that India is taking in reducing the tariff in the products where the US manufacturers and producers have a deep interest. This product range includes automobile, medical devices, agricultural produce, whiskey, dairy product, steel and aluminum products. So here we will see that India is initiating the steps by demonstrating significant reduction for specific products. But in addition to that, there will be a bilateral approach where the two sides will sit together and come to a common agreement that which are the products where India is seeking market share increase in US and where US manufacturers are seeking market share increase. So that will be a subject matter of bilateral discussion. But I would emphasize this, Parikshit, that while the world has latched onto this April 2nd as the date where significant announcements will be made, but I would say that it is beginning of a period of change. We'll have to watch it out for an extended period of time. It is that the trade economic cycle that we have seen for past 3 decades, that trade economic cycle is changing its direction. We have seen in past 3 decades that duties were being reduced. It was the phase of free trade and globalization. That trade economic cycle is changing. The tariff barriers, the more active users of trade and tariff barrier would be in vogue, and various countries would be using it. So it's a very active phase of change that we'll watch out for next decade or so. So it is not a point of time event, it is a period of time event, and we have to approach it in that manner.
All right. So, Himanshu, do you believe that this is weaponization of tariffs, and it's not just limited to US? Other nations are also watching, and perhaps this is the beginning of weaponization of tariffs and trade, not just for 1 year, but for the next 1 decade?
I would say that, yes, it would be a long-term layered rollout of trade and tariff changes. I won't use the phrase weaponization. I would say that trade and tariff as a policy tool, which will be more actively used in the coming decade, and various countries will take a very calibrated approach and to these changes. It is a long-term change, and it will roll out in multiple phases with various stakeholders balancing out and observing what is happening at the other end.
Right. Let me go across to Anurag once again. Anurag, will the bilateral trade deal, there is a lot of optimism that such a deal would be signed by September or October this year when Donald Trump visits India. In fact, India has said that the talks last week have been very positive, and the US is encouraged by those talks. Will this bilateral trade agreement be actually beneficial for Indian companies in growing their trade basket, becoming a larger supplier for the world as well?
Yeah, surely. There is no doubt about it. If India and US are able to close this bilateral trade deal, it will be beneficial to Indian exporters for the sheer reason. I can give 2 reasons why it will be beneficial. One, when the bilateral trade deal happens, even if it is not a FTA, it is a side deal wherein MFN-based reductions are agreed by India. But then also India would seek something against the market access which India is providing. So some access, greater access to the US market will be gained by India, one. Second, if reciprocal tariffs have been brought in, or other such tariffs have been brought in, say auto component tariffs have been announced, in bilateral trade deal, India will surely negotiate a way to mitigate these tariffs. So existing trade barriers or the imposition of certain more trade barriers will be mitigated. More trade openness will be brought in terms of market access in the US market. So these two will be a great enabler for Indian exports to the US, and certainly it will benefit Indian exporters. One more important thing is the posturing. Say if US, as of now, since past 4 months, has only announced negotiation of a trade deal with India amongst all the major economies. So even the US businesses, which know that manufacturing setup in US is a long and ardent process, and cost of production could be very high, because for years now US has moved on from a manufacturing economy to a largely tech-driven, and services economy. So manufacturing can be a long-run process. So for India-US trade deal, even the backing could be given by the US businesses who know that apart from India, they would not be able to source cost-effective, manufactured and resilient supply chain products into the US. So in all, if India is able to close this trade deal, it will be very beneficial for Indian exporters. That I'm very sure.
All right, we've run out of time, but thank you so much, Anurag and Himanshu, for joining us on the program with those sharp views on what 2nd of April 2025 means in the history of world economics going forward. With that, it's a wrap on this special episode here on tariffs and trade. We'll keep an eye out on how India is impacted on the 2nd of April.